Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me in this Monday for a special topic. And I wanted to just being grateful for being able to have this topic today. So this is an exception to my normal Mondays. So thank you for joining me this morning. So let's go into a few questions that I wanted to ask you. Have you ever felt you had to hide part of yourself to fit in? Do you think anyone on your team at work or in your family has? Do you wish you could be part of an inclusive community where people feel seen and heard, and different experiences and perspectives are valued? So, is your answer yes? Then you are in the right place. This is a conversation for everyone, and it will require you to think about yourself, those on your team, and your life in retrospective ways. Our guest, which I'm excited about, is an expert who delves into the profound concept of unhiding. What makes her uniquely relevant is a defining experience when she was questioned about the diversity of leadership at an organization she was part of, and courageously shared how she didn't feel included in that discussion. Her differences were dismissed. She realized that she was still hiding parts of herself. This pivotal interaction sparked her profound realization that the way we frame diversity conversations can inadvertently force people to hide essential aspects of their identity. This insight propelled her on her transformative journey. She is not just a TEDx speaker, she's the best-selling author of Singlehandedly Learning to Unhide and Embrace Connection. With wisdom and compassion, she's here to engage us in a discourse on how to unhide our best selves and foster an environment of belonging. So let's extend our warmest welcome to Ruth Rathblott. Good morning, Ruth. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. We're starting off on a good note, I believe, on this Monday, so I'm excited.
Absolutely. No, I'm so thrilled to be here with you and excited to jump into a conversation on all things hiding and unhiding.
So, just briefly, if anyone has not picked up yet the book, I just wanted to share if anyone can see. This is Ruth's first book, and we're going to dive into this book. It's called Single-Handedly um, Learning to Unhide and Embrace Connection. So I love this book. So if anyone, I'm going to put in the information there in the chat towards the end of our session, so that if you're interested, certainly feel free to pick it up yourself. So now let's just dive in. So let me ask you, do you know why, and what are we hiding from? Like, what are most of us think? And I don't think that any of us really think about it in that depth, but like, why is that?
It's so interesting, Sharon. I started my life journey not thinking there was anything different about me, right? And then for most of us, there's a pivotal point. It typically happens in our adolescence or our teenage years where we start to notice we feel a little bit different, right? And all we really want to do, which is a healthy part of development, we want to fit in. And so those things that are different about us almost get exaggerated. They become something that we try to either cover or hide that part of ourselves. And so I think about it for myself that at 13, I started to notice that my limb difference was something different for me. And I really believed at 13 that I was the only one that felt different about my body, that the only one that felt like they had to hide, not realizing as I got older and started understanding this concept of hiding, that the truth is, Sharon, most of us are hiding something. And we hide out of a fear of judgment. We hide out of a fear of rejection. We hide out of a fear of not fitting in because people thinking that we're not able to do something. And so as I've been on this journey of exploring what people are hiding, people share things like they hide, yes, their visible physical disabilities, their non-apparent disabilities like mental health and neurodiversity, but it extends beyond that, Sharon. It's people hide their family backgrounds, their finances, their relationship status, their education, their age. I mean, the list goes on. Even more so now, I keep hearing people even hide their politics, right? You can't be with your family unless you share, quote unquote, the same politics. Like, so people are hiding things all the time. And often we walk around thinking, just like my 13-year-old self, that we're the only ones hiding. And it's exhausting.
You're right. And it's interesting that, for most of us, when the first time I heard you, you were talking at a women's conference in Westchester University here, I had to think about that. And I thought, what am I hiding? Like, am I really hiding? The concept of hiding something, I think we all have some semblance of what it is, but I don't think we really know it in terms of like a sense of community or belonging, or like in the way that we think, because we do feel, like you said, we're doing this alone, for a myriad of reasons, whatever that may be. So yes, I learned quite a bit that, I said to myself, oh yeah, I might have a few things that I am hiding, and why am I hiding that? From a professional as well as personal. The two ties together to some extent. In what an environment you're going to be in. So
Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah, I totally agree. So if I have an awareness, in that frame, in that context, that I'm hiding something, and I'm not, I'm looking to find, how do I, step out of that? And I want to now, for a myriad of reasons, right? I think that if there is I'm now comfortable, or I've learned something about myself that I'm ready to unhide. I now want to, open myself to my community, to my, colleagues, to my friends, to my family. What would be my first step to, unhide or hide? What would that be?
Yeah, I think what you're touching on too is a really important piece, which is unhiding is not an overnight even a flip of a switch. It's not an overnight process or a flip of a switch. It really is. And I think that first step of acknowledging part of what you're hiding, it's interesting, Sharon, and this is what I'm writing about in my second book called Unhide and Seek, which is this idea that when I talk about the concept of hiding, there are four reactions. One is what you did, which is the curious, right? What I wonder, am I hiding anything? Like when Ruth talks about this idea of hiding, and she says that most of us are hiding something, if not all of us, am I hiding? Like what I'm asking yourself, right? What am I hiding? The second reaction is often also, I know exactly what you're talking about, Ruth. I hide. Like there are people who know exactly, I don't even have to go into an explanation because they know, as I did at 13, and I hid my hand for 25 years. If I had heard this subject, I would have known exactly what was hiding was about. The third reaction I get is somebody who says, and Sharon, we may both share people like this in our lives, who says, oh, I'm an open book. I don't hide anything, right? And so there's that feeling of people wanting to share a lot about themselves, and yet realizing there are still things that you're not sharing. So that open
Mm-hmm.
book is often curated.
Mm-hmm.
And then the fourth type of person is the person who almost I see in an audience when I'm speaking is has their arms crossed and is like, I don't even know why we're talking about this. This has nothing to do with work. And it's what I call the fortress, the person who is not ready to go there yet, or maybe doesn't want to go there because it is intense and there's a lot of shame potentially or fear. And so I think the first step, and I've outlined this in 4 steps, the first step is acknowledging, what are you hiding? How is it holding you back from thriving and connecting with others and connecting with yourself? And that's really the self-centered work that I think is so important. And I say self-centered, not in a bad way, but in a real way of centering on yourself. So the first step is to acknowledge it. What's holding you back? How is it holding you back from thriving and connecting? What type of hider are you? Taking a pause and then thinking about it. And then the second step becomes in thinking about someone to invite in to that journey, that trusted person that when I say that, Sharon, I imagine immediately to you and to your audience, there are people that come to mind immediately, right? That's your go-to, the person who
Mm-hmm.
has trust, who has empathy, who asks questions, who's curious with kindness. That's your go-to. So the second step becomes inviting that person in and letting them know, hey, I just heard this Facebook Live event. This woman talked about hiding with Sharon. How much am I hiding in my life? That's a way to introduce the conversation. And then allowing for a pause there too, because not everyone understands this idea of hiding or even understands that you've been hiding. So the second step is critical in terms of choosing that person. The third step is then thinking about building your community of people who have also been either hiding parts of yourself or where you see yourself as different. For me, it was the Lucky Finn community, which is an organization that focuses on people with limb differences like mine.
Mm-hmm.
And it was building out that community, finding those people who had that shared experience. And that was super powerful to know I wasn't alone. I wasn't the first person to hide. I didn't invent hiding, and others could understand the fear that went along with that and the shame. And then the fourth step of unhiding, after you have acknowledged and invited and built your community, is sharing out your story. So that even if it's to a small group of people, people don't have to go on a podcast or speak globally about this or write a book, but it can be the idea of sharing out your story with a few friends, because what immediately starts to happen is someone else in that group will say, I've had that feeling too. And I've seen it, the power of it, Sharon, in terms of, I saw a young woman who shared out her anxiety with her team, and someone else on that team said, thank you so much for sharing it, because I was concerned about how to share out my ADHD. I've had people tell me they didn't realize that they weren't the only ones dealing with financial issues. But when they shared that out, others said, oh, I'm like that too. It's the idea of sharing out so that you start to gain support. But really, these 4 steps become a loop or a flywheel for someone else to start to acknowledge what they're hiding.
So I like those steps that you've outlined, because I'm listening and I'm sensing that it's a progressive step, right?
Yes.
That it would be someone you start out with as your trusted friend, or could you also elicit a coach as well? Like sometimes, like sometimes a third party, is good in the sense of objectivity as well. So you can have your trusted friend and your coach, and then you progress throughout the steps, that as you unveil and as you work through the unhiding process, and then you start to move on to the second phase within a community. And can you have both? Like, are you able to have your friend and then your community to as you're progressing through the steps?
100%. I think you bring up a really good point. Sometimes that trusted friend, that initial step, is a counselor or a therapist or even a manager or an HR leader, somebody that in your space, in your world, that you could trust with this information, just to share it out for the first time, so that they understand what you're going through. They understand what you may be challenged with or why you felt the need to hide. I remember, Sharon, at one point, I was talking to somebody after a speaking gig, and he said, Ruth, in meetings, I don't speak. I know exactly what you're talking about hiding. He said, I have an accent and I don't share it with anyone. And so I don't speak. So that first step for him was acknowledging it. The second step was then starting to talk to his manager about that, right? Like, so that to explain, because what happens when we hide is it affects us, because it's exhausting and it's lonely to constantly figure out when you're hiding, how you're so worried about someone finding out this thing about you, whether it's an accent, a stutter, a mental health challenge, a disability. Let's list all of them that we have before. And I imagine you and your audience can even think about more things that people are hiding. So it impacts you. It also impacts in a workplace the way that, and even outside the workplace, how people connect with you, right? Because then we start making assumptions saying, oh, Sharon doesn't want to, doesn't speak in this meeting, so she doesn't have any good ideas. She isn't really part of our team. She's not a good culture fit. She thinks she's too good for us. We start making assumptions about people's behavior based on a lack of information from that person who's hiding. So it impacts the way we connect with others, connect with our teams, connect with our supervisor. And then I will say it also impacts the workplace culture because we're not coming up with our most and offering our most creative ideas and innovative ideas. So it impacts how we're seen as a potential leader. It impacts how we're seen as adding to the corporate culture. And so as I think about this, yes, you can start to build that connection with, let's say it's an HR manager or your manager or that trusted friend, and then they help build the communities. That's the power of employee resource groups or community groups or meetups, is the idea of that shared experience with others.
And I think that you also the openness, right, for HR agencies that are helping, promote positivity and that culture in the organization that has, been put together, for example, right? And what you just said as an example, for some people that have the thick accent, that can also be limiting too, in a limitation that, I do have ideas, but because, I'm afraid that people won't understand me. I'm afraid that it's so, my English is so broken, or it has such a, it's almost like, it's stopping them and limiting them from growing as not only an employee, but just growing in general, because they feel that, for that, if that's a hindrance also. So it promotes limitations from an individual, but it also just limits your, mobility within an organization to be able to grow, skillfully in speaking. And so, yes, I'm with you on that there should be a connection. And I think that should be a time where you can, when you're one-to-ones or something, in the way that you're having that with your manager, or if leaders are managers are having that one-to-one with their employees, to be able to extract, some of it is extraction in the way of how they, how is that affecting them, and maybe help them in the process of, there's a class that could potentially, or a course that you can take online that would be able to help you, navigate through that, rather than, keeping them in that shell, because, that's how they see the world, and that's how they've been perceived bidirectionally, so it's a stalemate. You can't grow in that way.
And it's a two-way street. I think there's a couple things that you just said that are so important here, because I think it's changing mindset about difference. That's the first step, right? Because even when we say somebody doesn't speak English fully, well, they know in a whole nother language. Like, they are coming with a whole nother, I know when I've tried to learn other languages, it takes me a minute, right, to learn and to feel comfortable, et cetera. So it's not a deficit. It's actually a gift, right? That they have a whole nother language set. So it's not even broken. It's actually part of their journey. Like, there's that difference is a gift of what they have. And I think the other piece that I hear you talking about here too with me is this idea of leaders, right? Because I think sometimes we expect our employees to show up with their full selves, or what we now say is their authentic self. And yet, as managers and leaders, we haven't done that work to encourage that, or create that safe space by going first. And so I often work with leaders to say, okay, I know you want your team to bring their quote unquote authentic selves, which I'm not sure I totally buy into, because I don't think our workplaces are set up for that. And I ask back, I say, so what are you willing to share about yourself? How have you shown up as vulnerable? How have you shown up as sharing your challenges, of really demystifying leadership in terms of dropping old school leadership? I know, Sharon, I was someone who, as a leader and a CEO, I probably got it wrong a lot of the time, in terms of I didn't let people in. I believed that old school mentality of keeping people at arm's length, of not showing vulnerability, of feeling like I had to have all of the answers. And yet during my leadership pieces, there were times when there were things going on in my life where I maybe couldn't be there fully to support my staff or to let them in. And one of them included talking about my hand and my journey. And so even when you referenced in the intro, like, there was a moment where I hadn't let people into that journey of what having a disability was like. And yet I expected my team to share themselves with me, but I hadn't shared myself with them. So my advice and advocacy is that leaders go first in this journey of unhiding and sharing that. And there's a huge asterisk here, and that it's a two-way street. That once leaders go first, it's also about employees joining them and finding that and creating that culture of psychological safety, of creating that space where difference is okay, that people who face challenges, that's part of the culture that we embrace, that different experiences, different perspectives, they're valued here. And that's from senior leadership to employees. Like, that's the culture we're trying to create with Unhiding.
I totally agree with you in what you just said. And I do think that leaders set the tone, set the tone for the organizational culture, and they also, to your point, as they open themselves into their vulnerabilities and how they're steering the ship, and what is happening from all aspects, because the ship can be steered in a good direction but come into a challenging way, and how you're going to face those challenges. I do think that they do have a responsibility in terms of setting that tone. And once they set that tone, you said something in terms of psychological safety. I do think that some of that unhiding becomes because of some safety that folks feel that, oh, I'm in a safe space. I can, at least start the journey of opening a bit of what I had hiding. And for the most part, at least I can only speak for myself, some of that hiding is also calculated, right, in terms of both professionally and personally, because it's the, how would that affect my job? Will I still have a job? And how people look at me about that in terms of my work or my work ethic, and also assessing the environment, both professionally and personally. So to your point, that exasperation of hiding is because either they don't feel safe, but also it's the constant, I'm always looking at my back and be like, well, what's going to happen today, and things like that. So it's most folks, I think, don't think that they're actually hiding something, but we're all hiding something to the extent or degree of safety. And I think that's important to keep in mind, as an organization, what kind of safety or psychological safety that we as employees or colleagues, even amongst ourselves, are we safe, and is also our managers showing the same thing? And I do think that it's a top-down situation.
Absolutely. And no, it's interesting. Two things that you just said. One is the steps of thinking about unhiding, right, in your workplace, and all those pieces. That was literally the last edition of my newsletter, is 5 questions to ask yourself when you're thinking about unhiding in the workplace, because it isn't a flip of a switch. It isn't like all of a sudden tomorrow you're going to go in, or today you're going to go in and say, oh, this is what I've been hiding from you guys. That's not the journey. That's not the continuum of what this looks like. And I do think that it is up to leaders to create those spaces, so that you can't delegate culture at the end of the day, right? So, and I think it took me a minute, I'm going to say longer than a minute, to figure that out, because I thought, oh, well, we'll create a culture committee, or we'll create I don't work with robots, so people here create the culture. As you pointed out, leaders set the tone, and they're responsible for it. And so checking in to see what that means. And then at the same time, how do we create a space where different, and I go back to, there's 2 questions I always ask, is how am I hiding, and how is it holding me back from thriving and belonging? That's the kind of first piece of it. And then the second piece is the figuring out, well, what is it that would help me do my job better, right? What would help me connect with others better? And is it safe to do that? And I think those are the 2 pieces of constantly thinking through and utilizing the outside counsel that we talked about before, utilizing journaling, just figuring out those spaces so that you can feel comfortable to understand what it is. That's why that acknowledgement piece goes first, Sharon, because without that acknowledgement piece and doing the work and the reflection, then you can't do this work.
I agree. And it's not a sprint. It's definitely a marathon. And in that marathon, you'll have marathons, right? Because I think I want to get to this third question I had that, now that you've unhide and now that you've done the work, and again, this isn't like you and I have said before, this isn't a light switch. You can't just turn this at a flip of the switch. It's not something overnight sensation. It's something that you have to work through. And really through and through, because you also evolve as a human being. I would hope that all of us do evolve at some point in time within within our lifetime here, because there's that impermanence. So even if in that there's still some things that you might be inherently hiding, not because of some choices, but some things that have happened around you that's going to force you back into the shell. That being said, though, let's just say that you've unhide now, and now you're into, you're really doing well, and that, the aspect of a continuum, because I think that's where, sometimes we get stuck in the, all right, I'm doing the work, I'm doing all of this, now what's, it's kind of like, well, what do I do? And so how do we sustain and maintain that? Because sustainability and maintenance is also just as important as when you first started and opened Pandora's box and you shaken the tree. You now see what's at the bottom of the tree. You can't unhide it. You now have to, you can't hide it. You now have to unhide it, deal with it. And so with that, you've dealt with it. Okay, so how do we keep progressing? How do we keep continuing?
Yeah. And I think one of the things you just said too is there's such crystal clarity in it, which is once you shake that tree, you can't unsee it. You may put it away again and be like, I'm not dealing with that right now, but you can't unsee it. That's why I encourage people I invite them to write it down, right? And to say, what am I hiding? To put it in a place, because once you write something down and acknowledge it, it really becomes hard to unsee. And the piece I think that you're also talking about is, I guess there's two pieces to this, Sharon. One is on this continuum of hiding to unhiding, you can be totally unhiding in one aspect of your life. There was a person I was on a panel with who was totally out about their LGBTQ status at work. Like they were part of their pride community. They were part of all of those different aspects. That was a big piece of their identity. And yet the thing they were hiding was their education level. And it was interesting because they went to community college and they didn't want to share that part because they thought someone would think they weren't smart enough, that they didn't belong. They weren't going to be a good manager because they didn't have the right pedigree and credentials. And so that's a piece that I wanted to emphasize with you and your audience too, is you can be unhiding and totally think you're doing well. Well, I'm out here and doing all of this. And yet examining where else in your life is preventing you from connecting and thriving, because in that example, they weren't connecting with their managers. They weren't connecting with their team in the same way because they were so afraid that if someone found out, that would hold them back. And so you can be on that. I mean, and there are spaces in my life where I talk about my hand and my disability a lot. And yet there are other places in my life that I'm still working on that hiding. So when we talk about sustaining, and even I will add, even within the unhiding of my hand, there are still things that come up, right? If someone stares too long, or if I'm meeting someone for the first time, what are they going to think about it? So there are still places. And so in order to sustain, and I think even to maintain, like you're suggesting, I think about the practices that got me here, which are journaling, which are therapy, which are talking to friends and family about those things as they're coming up, and really sitting with it a little bit. That pause is so important. Thinking about why did I feel like I needed to hide that from someone? What am I hiding from someone? Why did I feel the need to hide it? What would have been a different reaction? What was the expectation of how someone would respond when I shared it? Just doing some of that internal dialogue and then checking it out with people. And people, again, it goes back to those people that you trust. It's really working through those 4 steps again, because what I have found is, yeah, that acknowledging, oh, you felt like hiding today, Ruth. Okay. What was that like for you? Why, what showed up? Then the second is checking it out with someone else, saying, hey, here's when I felt like I needed to hide. Then going back to my community, that third step of people with shared experiences, to say, hey, have you ever felt like this? And then that fourth part is then sharing out my story so that people say, oh, I've been there too. I understand that. So getting that affirmation and that confirmation of you're not alone, because that's the whole real beauty and true beauty. It's almost like the secret, Sharon, is that unhiding is the key to connection. That's the gift. Unhiding is the key to this connection and to connection.
I love everything that we just talked about. So we're closing in on time. I know we can definitely extend this conversation, but I do want to close it out with just one thought. If anyone is going to pick up Ruth's book, I highly suggest it. And so when you are working through this book, I highly suggest that you take your time. And what I'm hearing from what you're saying in terms of the process, the process and the steps that they're needing to do, it's holistic approach is what I'm hearing also, and that it's a continuum. You don't really ever end in one aspect, but you can say that, if you were looking at 3 things that you feel that is needing to be unhidden, you can work on the first one, get to a second part, and then if you change, you feel like you're also going to need to review that. I'm now a changed person too. Where am I on this? So I like that continuum of, it doesn't end here. I can still, keep looking at the journey and keep looking at where I am. So I really like that part of it.
Well, just like with Maslow, in terms of the hierarchy of needs, that idea of self-actualization is connected to unhiding. And I talk about that in the second book, Sharon, because we're never really done self-actualizing. We're never, we're continuing to build ourselves. We're continuing to learn about ourselves and learn about the world around us. Because once we start to think about unhiding for ourselves, how are we thinking about what people are hiding outside of us too? Right? Because that's a whole nother level of connection and understanding. Is if it's true that most of us are hiding, how do we think about the others in our life that may be hiding as well?
Well, how do we reach you? What's the best way? And so your information, and then if you want to pick up the book, and then as you're coming out with the second book, how do we do that? So please let us know, and then I can certainly follow up and just make sure that we'll have your information.
Absolutely. No, and I'm so grateful for the time today with you, because I feel like this message is huge for most people, that they haven't thought about hiding, what they're hiding and how it's holding them back, or they are hiding. And I would love to shorten that process so they don't feel trapped in hiding. And the best way to connect with me is either through my website, ruthrathblott.com, or I spend a lot of time, Sharon, on LinkedIn. And so it's Ruth Rathblott is where I do a lot of work around this idea of hiding, and where people share parts of their stories too. But so I think both my website and also LinkedIn is where I spend. And then if you want to really get to know me, go to Instagram, because that's where some of the fun parts of my life are also shown.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for being our special guest. Thank you for having this conversation. I really appreciated the nuggets that you've shared. Hopefully you'd be able to come back at some point with your second book, so we can talk about that. But I feel like this is a good day to plant the seeds of thought for those that may or may not have thought about their hiding and where they are in the scheme of things. And I will definitely put your information after the session, so that if they need to reach out with you or get the book, like I said, it is a wonderful read, everyone. To my audience, please take your time, like I said, to read this book. I think there's something for everyone in this story that would spark where you are in the unhiding and your hiding process. So thank you again, everyone. Have a great Monday, and appreciate listening to